Good morning. My name is Geoff Brennan. I am the Safe Words Clinical Lead at King's College, where I work with Professor Alan Simpson to try and keep Safe Words, keep it alive, really. And it is alive. And thank you to everybody out there who's, if you're doing it, and thank you to anybody who's thinking about it. Do get in touch. We will help you. But yeah, so my job basically, among other things, is to keep Safe Words going. And I've been asked today to come and talk to you about what Safe Words tells us about engagement and linking in with therapeutic relationships. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, but I broke my leg. So I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me boring you over virtual mechanisms. So sorry about that. Okay. For the eagle-eyed among you, you can see that this is not from Safe Words, but another really good initiative to help patients and staff on inpatient psychiatric wards, and a project called Star Wards. And Star Wards is great. Selling point really was that it was designed and run by a rather charismatic service user person by the name of Marian Janner. Marian, I'm sure, will be familiar. It's quite a few in the audience, but Marian's kind of take was that wards could certainly be better. And she set up Star Wards to try and achieve that. And Star Wards was generally successful for people who took it up. And as a consequence, Marian got asked to contribute to roundtable conversations, that type of thing. And this quote actually comes from a meeting she attended where people were talking about new builds. And one of the things people were saying, which she agreed with, was that new builds would help with the therapeutic offered to patients. But Marian said that, but if it came to the crux, that she would rather be treated in a car park by good people, that she'd take to be good staff, than in a palace by bastards. So she was very much positing that for her, and indeed her hypothesis that for many other patients, the thing that helped them, if anything did help them on an inpatient service, was the relationships that they formed and the help that they received from the staff. And that took many forms in terms of practical psychological help, but generally being somewhere where people were cared for by staff who were non-judgmental, that type of thing. And of course that fits very much with what we know. There's growing evidence, in fact I would say it's now incontrovertible evidence, that one of the factors that really does help with any form of therapy is the therapeutic alliance, is the relationship that the therapist and the patient can form, and that if that relationship is mutually moving towards mutually agreed goals, if there is an element of respect and indeed liking within the kind of human aspect of the relationship, and if the patient in particular feels that the therapist is on their side, then these factors add up to a very good therapeutic alliance, which bodes very well in terms of outcomes, regardless of the therapy. So essentially, the better the therapeutic relationship, the better the outcomes. Now, if you're going to receive psychotherapy at something like the Tavistock or the Portman Clinic, that's not a problem. The relationship between you and your therapist is very mutual. There's probably a lot of choice that you have in that. But I think we'd all acknowledge in this room that that's very, very different for an inpatient psychiatric ward. And this quote, which comes from what the Australians call consumer, but for us would be patients, this quote from a patient critique of Safe Words really hits that right up front. And that basically an inpatient ward is not a neutral place of therapy at all. An inpatient psychiatric wards, whatever interventions happen within them, has to factor in the fact that they are anything but neutral. They are places, as it says there, psychiatric hospitals where state power is enacted to involuntarily detain and control people's bodies. So essentially, and this critique by the patient group was very favourable towards safe wards, but said, look, we have to talk about the reality that the inpatient environments are places where people are involuntarily detained. And in that, we're not just talking about the gross use of detention, such as the Mental Health Act. So the law to ensure that people are involuntarily detained. For a vast number of other patients, even voluntary patients, there is usually some aspect of negotiation to agree to an admission, and sometimes that can feel coercive to patients, as in, we want you to go in, but we see no other option should you not. So many patients are in hospital, not as voluntary and not as a kind of neutral act, but certainly as an act that has been predicated by coercion, or in fact they're in a place that is something that they generally don't want to do. And the inpatient ward has to take that into account for any intervention. If we're talking about building a therapeutic relationship with patients, we have to be honest and come from this position that it's built on coercion. And safe wards, in many ways, takes that up front. Now, at this point, I would say that safe wards isn't, in fact, focused on individual therapeutic relationships between patients and staff. Safe wards is a community intervention, and as its name kind of indicates, it is interested in making wards safer. And the way that it makes wards safer, and I apologise for anybody who's come to this before. Jumping around. It's interested in making wards safer because it's reducing conflict and containment. Those two sets of behaviours on the right-hand side, basically things that can harm people. And those behaviours are displayed by both staff and patients. Not bad patients, we know these things happen. But the safe wards model postulates that we make wards safer by working very hard to not get to the right-hand side of this diagram where conflict and containment are happening. So in order to not get there, to not get dragged over there, we need to pay a lot more attention to what happens in the space preceding conflict and containment. The originating domains just goes back to what we're saying. An inpatient ward is just a unique place, and with that uniqueness throws up a number of challenges for both the staff and the patients that we call flashpoints. Now, flashpoints are difficulties, psychological or practical, that the community is going to have to manage just because they're thrown up by the fact that this is an inpatient ward. And what safe wards indicates is that the manner in which flashpoints are handled. So if the flashpoints are handled well by the ward generally, then there'll be low levels of conflict and containment. And if flashpoints are managed less well, then there will be higher levels of conflict and containment. And the factors that indicate whether or not they're managed well or not are what the staff and the patients actually do, how they run the ward, the culture they create on the ward, how much they're working in tandem to kind of make the ward a place that is as therapeutic as possible for the patients and indeed for the staff. So all those factors add up to indicate whether or not conflict and containment will actually be reduced. Now, there are several factors in this that I'd want people, that safe wards would ask people to take particular note of. The first one is the fact that safe wards indicates very clearly that the patient community, so that's the group of patients, are an active agents on a ward. And they can act in ways that directly influence conflict and containment in very positive ways. In other words, they can do things. The patient group themselves can do things, can be empowered to do things that will drive down conflict and containment. Essentially, the more the patients have, the more say the patients have over the ward, the more that their opinion is taken into consideration, and the more that the staff try and work within the realities of the patient experience to help them to negotiate through the ward, means that they're less likely to need to go to conflict behaviours, which means that their staff are then less likely to go to containment behaviours. So there's a very clear indication that the tighter the staff group and the patient group can work together, the better the ward would be enabled to reduce to be safer. Now, the actual safe wards interventions are complicated, but they are looking at enhancing that factor, that they want staff and patients to work in closer tandem, that the patients actually have more power, more say over the ward, and they can directly influence some of the things that happen on the ward. But then it's also looking at some other micro behaviors, that staff communication, particularly to patients, is something that is carefully considered to always be kind of moving in a positive direction. But also even the way staff talk to each other about patients is also moving in a positive direction. But the crucial factor here is that we are looking to really understand the patient perspective on a ward, pay some attention to that, and as much as possible share power with them and allow them to influence how the ward functions. All of this creates a culture, and I would call it the kind of the amniotic fluid within which therapeutic relationships are more likely to form. Basically, in order to form a therapeutic relationship between staff and patients, we need trust. We need communities where people feel safe, whether they can trust each other, even if mistakes are made, that they can come back from that. And generally, there is a feeling that the whole ward community is there looking and genuinely looking at the patient interest and trying to make the patients as therapeutic an experience as possible. So Safe Wards creates the culture within which those therapeutic relationships can kind of flourish. Now, when we look at making changes, and the kind of changes that are around with the new technologies, they tend to come from above. They tend to be policy driven. They tend to come from ideas within the organization that are coming onto the ward as aspects of changes in policy, changes in the way that the ward is managed. So in many ways, in terms of the originating domains of Safe Wards, they really fit most under the regulatory framework. And I think that there is some indication in Safe Wards that we need to be very careful about some of these aspects, because what's clear about things that come from regulatory framework is that there's a clear power differential. Now, often it's not the staff on the ward even that are dictating these interventions. It's often the system itself. But we can see directly in regulatory framework that one of the flashpoints, one of the difficulties that can be thrown out, is when patients do feel that that the power is being exercised by the psychiatric system without, and what's kind of not really stated here, is without them having a say, that they are disempowered, and that the psychiatric system is exercising its power. And as we went back, remember, these are places where the predominant power differential is one of coercion. So this can potentially result in aggressive rebellion. Patients can basically just rebel against whatever change is coming in, or that, they can basically feel that they've been overridden, their self-esteem, and that they have a kind of response of being done to, and which can lead to further kind of feelings of depression. So power is really, really important here. And I would even say not just power itself, but the perception of power. If you're going to bring something in, you do need to work very, very hard with the patient group at helping them to understand and have some say in, if not how the actual introduction, but how it's managed on the ward. So whatever we think about Safe Wards today, you do need to think about power. You do need to think about how that manifests itself for the patient group. If you are going to introduce it, you do need to be very clear on what the benefits you perceive are for both groups. You need to be clear on what the benefit is for the patient group, and I mean direct benefit for the patient group. And if there aren't any, you need to be honest enough to say that. But what other benefits? So, for example, that you believe that it would reduce certain other restrictions. You do need to problem solve with the community about what will the flashpoints be, how will it be managed, and how will you check and adjust as time goes on. So I think, Safe Wards itself would say that if you want to introduce any intervention onto an inpatient ward, you have an active patient group. You have to engage them. SafeWords does, and I think it's one of its great strengths. StarWords did, and it's one of its great strengths. Any intervention that comes in needs to go through the patient group, needs to engage them, needs to think about what this impact this will make on them. You need to be very upfront about power differentials, and how this will impact on power. If it's not bringing the community closer together, then it's driving them apart. And you need to really, really think about that. And as time goes on, if you're going to say there's a benefit, you need to check and you need to adjust. If the benefit isn't coming through, you need to adjust. Either take it away if it's driving the community further apart, or work out ways in which patients can have a say in how things are actually managed so that it's in their best interest. I hope that's some use to you. SafeWords doesn't have the answers for everything, and I hope that's given you some thoughts moving forward. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.